Hey everyone, this is the Sunday morning message, and I gotta tell you, this feels just a little bit strange. I'm used to doing update videos from home or from my home office or sometimes at the church or in the sanctuary, but this is coming to you as a Sunday message pre-recorded from my home office. Many of you saw the update video. I tested positive for COVID this week, and just as a quick update or a quick message. I'm feeling pretty decent. The symptoms have been very, very mild, and we're isolating here as a family together, and doing all the testing stuff, and just making sure that we stay safe over the next couple of weeks while we get over this deal together. A quick update before we jump into the message. Next Sunday and the following Sunday, Pastor Aaron is preaching. As luck would have it, even though I don't believe in that, it's totally been God guiding us the whole way. We've had Pastor Aaron plan to preach the next 2 Sundays already weeks and weeks ago. So I'm super thankful that God goes ahead of us and prepares a lot of those things on our behalf. So just super thankful for Pastor Aaron and for her willingness to jump in and to kind of keep going on, even though I won't be able to do Sunday church. But her messages will be coming to you from the sanctuary, and they will be, we'll figure out how that's going to work, but they will be coming to you next Sunday morning from Pastor Aaron, who will be preaching from the sanctuary. I know it's kind of weird to see or to hear a message kind of like with this background and everything going on, but hopefully you can manage with me as we kind of do this together. Okay, so we are continuing with our series in Luke, and I'm going to read from Luke chapter 6, verse 27 to 36, and we're going to dive right in together. So continuing on with what Jesus was teaching from the last Sunday, he's got his disciples together with him, and again, there's sort of this core group of disciples, a larger group of disciples, and a large crowd who are gathered here with him, and so he's teaching all of them. So as much as it is for his close disciples, it's kind of for everybody who's listening, who is following Jesus in some way. So here's what Jesus says to them. But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great in heaven, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind, and He is kind to the ungrateful and to the wicked. But be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Well, again, kind of similar to last Sunday, it sort of seems like Jesus is introducing a harsh teaching or something that either might be difficult to do or even difficult to understand. Why would he ask us to treat others that way? And as I prepared for this message, I was reminded of a time, and it was actually just the beginning of my second year of Bible school. So I'm not going to tell you the year lest you discover my age that way, but I guess I've already told most of you how old I am anyway, so it's not a big deal. But in my second year, I noticed a significant shift in the culture of the students from my first year to second year. So I guess the best way I could describe it is that in my first year, that may have been sort of like the last remnant, or sort of like the last group of people who kind of represented, the idea of fitting in, of trying to find your way of fitting into the crowd. And the reason why this shift was abrupt is because in my second year, I noticed a huge influx of students who were not trying to fit in. As a matter of fact, in many cases, they were trying to stand out. So there's a significant difference in the clothes that they wore, the music that they listened to, and of course, this is kind of like the early mid '90s, and a lot of the alternative scene was just becoming very popular among young people, and that included a lot of Christian young people, and so some of the things that were important was having clothes that stood out, and some people were making their own clothes, or some of them were wearing kind of like almost like hippie style clothes, and some were just wearing whatever didn't match, colors that didn't match, and styles that didn't really line up. People were wearing like socks outside of their jeans, and people were wearing shoes that didn't match. And maybe to you listening, it sounds really abrupt or different if you're a little bit older and haven't really followed the newer trends. But if you're younger, you're kind of thinking, well, yeah, so what? Well, here's kind of the reality: is that culture keeps shifting, but every generation seems to have to wrestle through what does it mean to fit in, and what does it mean to be different. For some, the idea of being different is a good thing. It shows your uniqueness, that you don't give in to peer pressure, that you are your own unique individual person, and that's to be celebrated. For other people, the idea of being different is difficult to manage because they want to be accepted by a group of people, or they're trying to find their place in society and even in their own friend group or their own community. So the idea of being different may carry with some people a positive feeling, and with others a very negative feeling. So this passage that we're walking through this morning, Jesus is outlining to us something super, super important. And that truth is that being different in our faith means being less like the world and more like Jesus. Because the reality is that we can desire to be different for all the wrong reasons. Some people have not experienced a lot of love or acceptance from peer groups or family members, and so they seek to be different in order to forge their own identity. In essence, they try to become somebody that they're not in order to gain that acceptance. Excuse me. But for others, the idea of fitting in can also be a negative thing, because people can often sacrifice their uniqueness. They can sacrifice their special qualities or their unique flair, whether that's music or fashion or personality, in order to fit in, because they feel like the parts that make them different are parts that cause them to feel embarrassed or shameful or unworthy, or they view those things as being less desirable than it would be if they looked like they fit in. But Jesus is teaching us in this passage that a disciple, someone who claims to follow Jesus, must actually live a radically different lifestyle. And to some of you, the idea of having a radical Christian lifestyle may conjure up negative images of people who are really flaky, or people who are really, really pushy with their faith. And these are not any of the things that Jesus had in mind when he called his disciples to be different. That's why I kind of gave that phrase that the heart of this passage, that being different in our faith means being less like the world and more like Jesus. It has to do with the attitude of the heart and the perspective of our mind. So in this passage, Jesus starts off by saying some very curious words. He says, "But to you who are listening." Now, I mean, if you kind of picture yourself in the scene, you can see that Jesus has his disciples, and they're kind of gathered in this outer area. It's kind of like a plateau, and there's some hill behind them, and there's some hill kind of down below them. So they're kind of halfway in between, most likely kind of this hillside, mountainy sort of area. And it's kind of like there's nobody who's there that hasn't intentionally made an effort to be there, right? It's kind of like having a big family camp out in the middle of central Alberta, forest somewhere. Nobody just happens to walk by. This is an out-of-the-way sort of place. So anybody who's there is intentionally there. So why would Jesus say, "But to you who are listening"? It's actually a very peculiar address. And if you were to read through the book of Matthew, you would see the phrase over and over again. Jesus says, "He who has ears, let him hear." And Jesus often used that phrase, and it was simply a way to introduce that he's about to talk about something that is super important. Excuse me. It's Jesus' way of actually saying, now I'm intentionally going to say something that you need to take special note of. You see, a lot of what Jesus taught happened in the middle of circumstances, that Jesus would respond to the things that were happening around them, around him, around his disciples, and he would use those and he would draw from that situation in order to teach them something. But in this case, and in other specific cases, he is initiating a teaching that he knows is going to be very important for his disciples as they continue to follow him for the rest of their lives. So he's essentially saying, listen up. This is really important stuff. So the heart of this message, the heart of kind of this passage is love. Now, it's not actually a surprise that Christians should be known by love. I mean, God is love. The scripture teaches us that his nature is love. But why would Jesus go out of his way to say that love is the heart of our faith and love is the heart of the way that we actually follow him? Well, he starts off by actually using some pretty severe examples. So it's easy to love family members, it's easy to love friends, it's easy to love, even people from the past who maybe we don't have a lot of contact with today, but we remember with love the relationship we shared with them. Or people that have had a significant impact in our lives. We think about them and there's an expression of love in our heart towards them. But Jesus doesn't start with the people who are closest to us or the people that mean the most to us. He actually starts with the people we would most easily dismiss or put out of our minds or actually try and forget. Or, in worst case scenario, he's actually addressing people that we would want to act the opposite towards. Right? So people that would mistreat us, people that would hate us, people that would steal from us. He's actually simply saying, these are the people that we need to express love to the most. Not because they deserve it, but because a disciple of Jesus is characterized by love. That love is to be the defining trait of a disciple. If there were a pyramid, and each layer of that pyramid were kind of stones or blocks that are important to being a disciple, the very top triangular part of that pyramid is actually love. The piece that is sharpest, the piece that is at the top of this pyramid of ideas of what it means to follow Jesus is love. And the reason why it's love is because God himself is love, and he calls us into relationship with Jesus in order to reflect that very same nature, in order to reflect that same character and that same heart. So Jesus says that love is the distinguishing mark of being a disciple. Now, let's just have a little time out for a second. Now, think with me, and kind of pretend that we're live, maybe in the sanctuary or whatever. Think with me, what are some of the most defining characteristics of Christians? Now, think about people who have had an impact in your life, people that we worship together with, our church family, other church families you've been a part of. Probably some of the most memorable things that stick out are things like this. Powerful times of worship. Times of either corporate prayer or small group prayer, maybe times where you've gathered with a small group and you supported one another by kind of sharing your burdens and supporting and praying for each other. Some people think about good teaching and seminars they've taken or sermons they've listened to. Others may think, interceding or even serving the poor, or getting involved in community events and sharing our faith. And all of these are super important in our Christian life. However, Jesus doesn't point to those things as the distinguishing mark of being a disciple. It's almost like I don't want to say that he assumes those things, but I think he bypasses those things in order to get to the heart of what it means to be a follower. And that is to live by the strict code of loving others. And that this love actually has no borders or no limits. So Jesus says, take the normal group of people you love, and there's good reasons why we love the people who are close to us, and now expand that circle to include anybody, anywhere, anytime. And especially those who mistreat us, especially those who've done us wrong, especially those who have hurt us, who have misspoken about us, who have stolen from us. And in our world today, especially in kind of this Facebook world, this social media world, words are having a huge impact. Right? The things people are saying are causing others either to be really frustrated and agitated, and for others to be kind of like, rallying behind a cause or an idea that they really believe is true. And a lot of people are sort of feeling pulled apart because of it. And one of the reasons, I think, is because a lot of the conversation that's happening these days doesn't actually have love attached to it. Even if there's science, even if there is compassion, even if there is truthfulness, oftentimes these are not actually communicated with love towards other people. And so if I were to actually simply ask the question, what would the world around us look like if our first attitude, our first thought, and our first expression towards other people was completely filled with love? How would we talk different? How would we act different? How would we think and feel different if that was our first and primary mode of expression? I think it's possible because that's what Jesus did. I think it's possible because the Apostle Paul tells us in Ephesians that before the cross, we were by nature enemies of God because of the sinfulness of our hearts. That we were born separated from God, and that the cross was God's way of reconciling us to himself. That Jesus' death and resurrection changed how God viewed us, and it changed how he related to us. So Jesus, even when he came and taught his disciples, he did so as God's perfect representative, being God himself, fully God, fully man. He represented the Father to us and represented us to the Father. Even though, theologically speaking, spiritually speaking, we were wayward. We were enemies of God. Even those first disciples, Jesus treated them with love and tenderness and respect, and sometimes, even harshness as he was trying to challenge and grow their faith. But their spiritual status was separation from God. And yet he still treated them with such great love and compassion. That Jesus himself is the ultimate expression of the love of our Heavenly Father. That even though we were foreigners, aliens, that we were by nature objects of God's wrath, that God reconciled us to himself through Jesus. The ultimate act of love towards a world, including you and I, that was opposed to God. I mean, many of you have been Christians for a long time, and many of you even since you were little children. But the gospel is clear, is that we were born into sin. We were born enemies of God. And once we receive Jesus, we're no longer enemies of God. We're children of God. So I love the fact that Jesus not only spoke about what it means to treat others with love, but that he was the actual ultimate example of that teaching. I mean, no one could ever accuse Jesus of being a hypocrite. As he hung on that cross, his prayer was that God would forgive those who were responsible for putting him there. And that the act of taking all of our sin on himself on the cross is the expression of love from the Father towards us. And that he bore all of the judgment and punishment and shame that should have been ours. It's the ultimate expression of love. So Jesus' point is that love is the distinguishing mark of a disciple. That being different in our faith means being less like the world and more like Jesus. The world would say, love people who love you and hate people who hate you. Or at the very least, if somebody hates you, ignore them. Kind of like talk to the hand. Don't give them the time of day. Like just avoid them because they're toxic, because they're hurtful, because they don't have your best interest in mind. But the truth of this passage, and maybe it's hard for us to accept because we live in this world where that philosophy or that way of believing and thinking is so common. It may be hard for us to understand that Jesus would say, love your enemies. Love the people who express hatred towards you. Love the people who ignore you, who mistreat you, who step on you, who steal from you, And stealing doesn't necessarily mean physical property. I mean, people may steal your dignity by trying to destroy your reputation. People may steal your sense of wholeness as they maybe gossip about you or backstab you in some way. Jesus is basically saying everybody who enters our sphere of influence is a recipient of love, regardless of their character, regardless of how they treat us or others. And initially, it may not seem like that's very fair. Why should we love people who don't deserve it? But then we step into the place of those who at one point didn't deserve God's love. So then we are also guilty of that same thing. Which one of us has not mistreated somebody else? Which one of us has not spoken out of turn? Which one of us has not said or felt or done something that was wrong or hurtful towards somebody else? So Jesus' idea of doing to others what we would want them to do to us is the heart of love. We would want to be loved, even by people who we don't know, even by people that we would come across. Everybody wants to receive that kind of kindness. But imagine a world where everybody lived by this law of love, by this core attitude of love everybody always, all the time. Nobody would ever feel unloved. Nobody would ever feel disrespected. Nobody would ever feel hurt or betrayed. If everybody acted this way, the amount of brokenness in our world would be so much less. And Jesus is saying, my people need to lead the charge when it comes to loving others. My people need to be on the forefront, the frontier of what it means to love the people around them and to love the world. Now, we do love in incredible ways. We send missionaries to other countries to preach the gospel. We support local activities, to put clothes on people who need clothes, to give food to people who need food. And even as a church, I mean, we have donated and we have helped people, and people have come asking for help, and we've done everything we can to try and help and support and love people, even if we don't know whether the intention was totally true, even if we don't know if we're being lied to. Our policy is to try and give in practical ways to meet people's needs and to leave everything else up to Jesus. But it's a hard viewpoint to take, especially when you've been hurt, especially when you've been the victim of somebody else mistreating you. And that's actually the whole point. That's what makes a disciple of Jesus different. What makes a disciple of Jesus different is when we live by that law of love. We take the hurt or the wrong that is done to us. We actually give it to Jesus as we forgive other people and then act towards them in love. You can't act towards someone in love if you're holding a grudge or being bitter. You can't act in love towards someone if what you have in your mind, in your heart is vengeance or mistreatment, or to ignore somebody or to shut them out or push them away because of how you've been treated. It's hard. It's a hard teaching, but it's not just a teaching. It's actually the core of our faith. It's the core of the gospel. For God so loved the world that he sent Jesus. I'd like for you to do an exercise with me. 1 Corinthians 13, this is known as the love chapter. And with this, we're actually going to close our time. And so we're going to do an exercise together. So if you're with me, tuning in somewhere somehow, grab your phone or grab your Bible, pause this if you need to in order to grab one, and then go to 1 Corinthians 13. It's a passage read at many weddings, and even though it's applicable in the relationship between a husband and wife, the design of the passage, the intent of the passage is to speak about love the way God has designed for us to experience it and to give it. So I want to read 1 Corinthians 13, the first few verses. I'm going to pause for a minute, have a couple things to say, and then we're going to do an exercise with the next set of verses. So starting at 1 Corinthians chapter 1. If I speak in the tongues of men or angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. So all of these other things that we could point to as being essential or a healthy part of a growing faith, prayer, worship, community, connecting, fellowship, small groups, serving the poor, reaching out, sharing our faith, all of these things are super important in our faith. But what Paul is actually saying is if love is not the motive for our thoughts, our words, and our actions, then those thoughts and words and actions actually amount to nothing. Now, again, this is a hard teaching to receive and incorporate. But it's there for us to embrace. That love is to be the core of who we are because we have first received God's love. And then we are the givers of God's love. So if love is the motive, even if the execution is wrong, even if we're loving and we say something and it comes out wrong, the expression is still love, and love is still what can land with other people. I mean, we may have to clarify, we may have to go back and kind of re-say something or redo something if it doesn't come out right, but that's small kind of stuff. But to have love as the core of who we are is the platform that we operate from, because it's the way Jesus came into our lives. He's the expression of the Father's love to us. And when we embrace that love and we receive Jesus, then we are now his followers. And therefore we are called to live by that same way of treating other people. So let's do an exercise together in the next few verses of 1 Corinthians 13. Again, these will be super familiar words, and I'm going to read them, and then we're going to change the words just a little bit, but I'm going to explain why in just a second. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. So now we're going to do two things with this passage, and this is the exercise. First, because God is love. This is 1 John 4:8. That God is love. We're going to insert God for the word love in this passage. And then we're going to do something else. So let's reread this, inserting God every time we see the word love. God is patient. God is kind. God does not envy and does not boast. God is not proud. God does not dishonor others. God is not self-seeking, nor is God easily angered. God keeps no record of wrongs. God does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. God always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. God never fails. Isn't that really outstanding to hear that out loud? That if God is love, we can substitute God when we see the word love in this passage. And we can see in that the way he treats us, the way he acts towards us. He's patient with us, eternally patient. I know I could use patience sometimes because I say and do and think things that are off target. I am in need of his patience every day. And his patience is an expression of his love. His kindness is an expression of his love. And kind of on down the list we go. But finally, we're going to insert our names into that passage. Scott is patient. Scott is kind. Scott does not envy. And Scott does not boast and is not proud. And we can go on down that list because God's love is within us. And that's how he calls us to live. Please know, everybody, that I'm going to be praying for you in the coming weeks, that God's love would be manifest more and more in your heart as you follow Jesus. I love you all, and I miss you all, and God bless.